Hello, and welcome to my channel. The usual housekeeping first. If you're new here, welcome. If you are one of my lovely regulars, welcome back. And if you like what you see, don't forget to leave me a like and subscribe. And a comment is always welcome, and I try to answer them all. Also, if you like what you see here too, consider joining my Patreon, where you will learn a lot more in depth. You know how it is. So all of those links are in the description box, so that's great. I'm looking out on a very dreary November day at the moment, and you know, we've kind of moved through the golden part of autumn here in North Germany, at least where I am. And if I'm not going to lie, some snow would be really handy to cover the mud, and it's got to the dirty bit of autumn. However, it is still beautiful in its own way, and there are mists rolling in, and you know, still some green in the trees, funny enough, and still some gold happening and things like that. So what I want to do right now is to create a November palette, and I've got a few mixed media supplies here in front of me, which I'm going to swatch out and then do a little sketch. But I also have something in mind in the way of an ulterior motive. I'm sorry if this has got shine on. I can't see because of my camera stand here, but this is relevant. What I've been doing just lately, how many years ago was it now? I think it was about 8 or 9 years ago, I bought a jelly printing plate, and I thought, oh, this looks nice, I'll do this. And I used it once or twice, and I saw what other people were doing, and I thought, yeah, it's a bit meh. It's not me. I don't want to diss anybody else's artwork, because art is a very personal journey, and I love looking at other people's stuff, but that doesn't mean to say it's right for me. And I'm not into the magazine clippings and transfer of photos and painting the jelly plate in one colour and then putting leaves on it and taking an impression of that. It's just not my style. First and foremost, I'm a landscape and wildlife artist, and I wanted to see what I could do with my jelly plate that was more in keeping with what I do. And this here is one point. Actually, this is a ghost print. Let me show you. This is the original print, because jelly plate printing is actually mono printing. And here again, I'm sorry about this, but if you want to know all the details, because this is not what today is supposed to be about, I have an actual point to today. If you want to know all the details about that, this is going to be on my Patreon tomorrow, this tutorial, and it will be for sale in case you don't want to commit, or if you can't commit, I do understand. I actually sell these tutorials for very low price, actually, so I'm told, and you can buy them individually if there's something you particularly love. So do check that out, and you can see that in the shop. So this will all be on sale individually. So this here is, when you do jelly plate printing, you're doing a mono print, which means you get one print, but you sometimes get a ghost print. In fact, mostly I get a ghost print. This was my first print that I pulled, and then I worked back into that with my mixed media. This was the second one I got. So one in the sketchbook and one I actually framed. And I was smitten. This is exactly what I'm trying to achieve with my jelly plate. That's not the usual sort of simplistic stuff. And I have been overwhelmed with comments from people who've said exactly the same. They're waiting for something a little bit more involved to do with their jelly plate. So I'm going to show you what I've been doing and working on to give you some idea, and then we'll go back to what I was talking about today and see how it is all relevant. Just let me see if I can grab a little stack of ghost prints that I haven't worked on yet, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, these were easier to find than I thought they would be. The ghost prints are simply that. You get something. Oh, that's a squirrel I did, and this one's actually quite a good one. All this is on just bits of paper. Doesn't matter, I can still use them. The reason I'm showing you these, even though jelly plate printing is not what we want to do today, is because of the colour palettes. I'm after this autumn palette for this end of autumn, and this just feels completely right. So I'm going to go through quite quickly to show you what else I've done. And these are all sort of same sort of deal, print, then work back in with mixed media. In fact, some of these are going into my shop for sale because I don't need all of them. So I've sort of gotten them ready here now, and then they'll go in and I will sell these because the walls can only hold so much. But the point I'm trying to make here is you can see there is a bit of a theme with the colours, you know, warm autumny colours and things like that. Actually here, that's the first print. This one here is the ghost print that came off there. I've started to work on it, but not too much. So, you know, I'm pretty happy that you can get 2 reasonable prints and work into it. Anyway, like I said, I'm trying very, very, very hard to stay relevant here. The point of showing you these is to show you the colours that I'm after, because we're at that time where, like I said, there's still a bit of green around, and let's get rid of all of that because that was for illustration purposes. These are the things I would like to swatch. I'm also looking at different products at this time of the year, which is also relevant to the printing that I've been doing, in that I'm introducing more acrylic gouache into my work. Sometimes I find that I'll get a kit of things, and please let me know if you find this relatable. One kit works for summer, another kit works for autumn, another kit might work for winter, and of course another one for spring. And if you try to just sort of bring one from one season to the next, it doesn't quite work as well, I find. So what I've done is I've got my favorite stuff for summer, which is pretty much gouache, colored pencil over the top, and various sorts of markers. Those markers might include, but are not limited to, fine liners, acrylic markers, paint, you know, the acrylic paint markers, all sorts of stuff like that. And I use those on repeat. And that's basically my little first aid kit for painting mixed media in the summertime. Autumn was a bit different, and I'm finding that what I want for autumn is more acrylic. Now, acrylic gouache is not acrylic paint. It is, but it isn't. Here, this is an example of an acrylic paint, and I love Mars Black, so I've got plenty of it, apparently. It's kind of a nice plastic layer that you can paint on. It won't shift. With gouache, you've got to be careful, because if you work back into it with another water soluble over the top, it can shift, it can go muddy. It requires skill that this doesn't require. This is easier. And why I love acrylic gouache in particular is because it dries velvet matte. So that's like gouache, but it doesn't move. Now, this is both a good and a bad thing, because basically it means that if you make a mistake and you want to move something, or if you want to mute something or knock the colour back, you can't do it the same way you can with gouache. It just, maybe there's a video in that so I can actually show you what I mean. You may already know what I mean, but I'm assuming we've got all sorts of levels of art watching. So just in case you don't know, that's the difference. So acrylic gouache or acryl gouache, all of these sorts of things, they are not going to move because they're acrylic. And like I said, for want of a better description, and trust me, this is not an accurate or very good description, but basically it's a layer of plastic that you're painting on, and it dries and it's then waterproof and immovable. It doesn't matter what you do, you'll wear through the paper first. You probably wear your brush out before you'll move it. You can also paint on things that aren't paper with this, and you might have wondered why my name for both this channel and also my Patreon is The Folk Art Factory. That's because that's where I started out. In the 90s, 30 years ago, I started out doing folk art and decorative painting in Australia, and it was hugely popular. And that's where I sort of, I started teaching and doing magazine work with that. And the name became known, and I thought, well, it's really stupid to get rid now, and it's kind of still relevant, so let's just keep it. So that's why I am The Folk Art Factory. So you can use this on MDF, you can use it with different media on glass and some plastics. I wouldn't, because it's not worth it on plastic. It's never going to look great and it can flake off. But MDF, wood, balsa, all those sorts of things. In fact, I'm thinking about for Christmas, I always do something with my patrons that is interesting for Christmas. Last year we made a Christmas card. This year I'm thinking about using some of these acrylic paints to create little Christmas decorations that you can actually hang. So acrylic gouache has made a return to my life, and I'm finding that it is really, really good for the autumn/winter, sliding into winter, that sort of thing. It's really good for that. And it's no coincidence that I've also, like I said, I got the jelly plate out and thought, right, I need to play with this. I've paid for the bloody thing, I'm going to use it. So it works really well with that. So that's kind of all come together quite timely, and these are the colors I want and everything like that. So I've got Turner acrylic gouache and I've got some Holbein. This one's a Pebeo. Again, I don't know how I came by this. I think it was given to me by one of the magazines I work for. Not something I would have chosen. It's not a brand I use very often. Nothing wrong with it. It's lovely paint, and I love Mars Black. Mars Black is always going to be in my top 10 of paints. So what I've got here is I've picked out a few colours that I think are very now, and we're going to swatch those out. I've got a couple that are very similar across two different brands. For example, I've got a Holbein olive and I've got a Turner olive green, and I'll see which one wins, because I don't want too many. One thing I've always done in my painting is using all the things all the time. It gets too much, even though that's what I see outside. I'm trying to keep it down to a few different colours and materials. I'll let you know how it goes. The trouble is I just love everything. The other thing is, love these markers. I have famously always used these small 0.7mm ones. Tuliart are my favourite brand for those. Love the colours, love everything about those. But just recently I've been seeing the point of these larger ones, and this is everything that this one isn't. It's massive, but that means you can get over areas quicker. Also, depending on how you hold it, you can get quite fine lines with it, even though it's a big one. Liquitex have got some press. I don't know, a couple of the reviews have showed that they're not as well liked as some other brands because they're not completely transparent. I've said it before and I'll say it again. That's why I like them. The textures you can achieve with these Liquitex markers for mixed media work is unreal. And let me just grab, sorry, I'm just going to grab one of these, see if I can actually find something where I've used it. Actually, that's as good a one as any. Can you see these marks here where the original print was pulled, and like I said, I worked back into this then with all sorts of other mixed media, and you can see streaky bits and bits of texture and things like that along branches. That's all achieved with these, and I've got a few different sizes. Some of these trees in the back are too, which is why they look so stringy and textured, and that's considered to be a failing. I think it's a brilliant thing and I love it. So I'll show you what I do with it. And like I said, we'll do a little sketch when we're finished here and you'll see what I mean. Posca markers, they go without saying. I've got a black one here and I've got an ivory one. Again, one is the larger sort and this one is a smaller bullet nib. What's this one? 0.9 to 1.3 line available. This one's an 8mm. This one is a 15mm, I think. From 8 to 15mm, which that range for beginners simply means that depending on how you hold it will depend on how thick a line you can get. But these are really, really good. So loving those. Yet, look, obviously I don't need to say too much about the fact that I love this little range of pencils. One's conspicuous by its absence. Let's be having you. No, wrong one. I've had to put it into a pencil holder. This is my Green Ochre by Caran d'Ache. I have Forest by Derwent Lightfast, Mars Black, goes with that. This one's a Derwent Lightfast as well. This one is Carmine Lake by Caran d'Ache Luminance. Love that one. Something a bit different. Yellow Ochre, Derwent Drawing. Light Aqua, Derwent Lightfast. And that goes with these sort of colours. And a Chinese white. Always have that on hand because I love that. I quite often will pair two things together. For example, you know, some of these, this pencil is roughly the same as that. This pencil is roughly the same as that. And of course, this one is roughly, gosh, come here, roughly the same as that one. And that works quite well too. That satisfies my craving to use everything and have everything on the desk, whilst keeping my colour range quite narrow. So if you find that you're the same, where you're thinking, you know, I really want this and I really want that, you can keep it together by having some families, different sorts of colours, but the same sort of colour, but a different media. That works too. And I've got a couple of bottles of ink here. These are Jacques Herbin. Les Trois de Paris, and this one is Eiffel Brown, I think. Yes, it's a nice golden brown anyway. Really lovely. These are Lightfast because I try not to use anything that isn't, because I'll get caught up in the moment and I'll think, oh, I want that colour, only to find that it's fugitive. So I try not to have them in the house. A little bit like packets of crisps. If I've got them, I'll eat them, so don't have them. This is the same. I've got Lightfast things, and that's it. I actually crocheted and felted these baskets to put things in, and they work really, really well. Okay, so I would now very much like to do a couple of things. One, I want to swatch these things out because this is the kind of sort of mix that I've come up with. Then I want to tell you about how disappointed in the green I am already. And what I'm going to do about it, because it's no point just being disappointed in something. We have to be able to solve things, because sometimes you buy things and you look at them on the computer screen and the colours look fabulous, and when you get them, they're anything but fabulous. And then, like I said, it'd be nice if we did a little sketch to show you how I might use these. So let's get on. Let me see. I'm going to put these acrylics in last because that's all something new. And with most of these, which I don't know that I am, I prefer to work wet to dry media, so perhaps I will do things slightly differently. Let me get some water, let me get a brush, and let me show you what I've got here. First of all, these inks are fabulous. This one is a lovely glowy autumn colour. And this is the Eiffel Brown. And it's just fabulous. Different paper will make inks behave in different ways. This is a 140 GSM. It's not a particularly good one, but it's my go-to for demonstrating. Now, ink is good as a base layer. Ink is also good as a glazing layer. And if you keep the brush reasonably wet, and also you can pre-wet the paper if you need to. Let me get all the ink off the brush first, that would be nice. This one, Les Trois de Paris, has got a really nice history. Well, I think it's interesting. It's about Napoleon's changing what the materials of the Parisian roofs were from copper and other bits and bobs to a cheaper and easier to use zinc. And that's why we've got this grey. That is fabulous for stormy skies. So, gosh, getting the lid on is a bit of an issue. These are only 10ml bottles. I have also ordered, if I can find them, this is a different one, but the same brand. You can also buy it in a 30ml bottle, which is better. And I did say horrible things before when I thought I'd paid a 30ml price for this 10ml bottle, but I hadn't. That was my mistake. Okay, next thing. With these, make sure that they're nice and charged up, which means shake them. You can hear that mixing ball there. And like I said, they are not opaque. They're quite translucent, but they are opaque enough to make a difference. And when you want some texture on a distant hill or texture on a house, that's where I use these, and they're fabulous for that. Posca ones are a little bit more opaque. This is ivory. This one's awfully useful for sunny spots on the ground or on buildings and things like that. So I tend to use that for that. Have I got an example? Yes, actually I have. Hang on. I'm part way through a sketch of a house using ivory. So that's what I mean. And the thing I love about this is with the acrylics is you can then go over it with your other media, as I've done here, what I'm doing here. I'm sort of, like I said, in the middle of this one. And you can work back over the top and put all sorts of textures in. So it works particularly well, actually. Gosh, I have there's not a desk being designed or built yet that's enough to accommodate all the things that I have around me all the time. Sounds like a me problem. This one's my Posca black, and that's extraordinarily good for the nice strong lines that I see at the moment when I look out the window, because the trees at this time of the year are starting to shed their summer mantle and their early autumn mantle, and the chestnuts in particular. I mean, what are we, the 7th of November? The chestnuts are bare. So these sorts of things in your kit for this time of the year are super, super handy. And that will see you right. Let me grab this again. That's what I've made this tree out of, because these sorts of things will see you through right into this winter time. This is pretty much in the winter, this one, I suspect. Even though I've used very warm colours, I was just trying to prove a point to myself. So what I've done here is with some of the Liquitex markers, I've done some of the more distant trees because they are less sort of opaque, this here, which means that pushes them into the background. So they're handy to have for that. And then this tree here that I wanted to come forward more, I've used this one because it's, you know, it's sort of, it brings it right towards you and gives you that perspective. This one here is a mixture of both. Even though it's in the foreground, it's a mixture of both. So that works well too. So all of these things, these 3 different sorts of markers with their different sorts of properties, have all got a point that we can use. Okay, let us move on a bit. Oh gosh, I absolutely hate getting the paint out of this. I would have thought it's a good one because of how, actually, let's not even bother doing that. Let us just get it straight from the source here, which is something I said I'd never do. You watch, it'll shoot across the room or something. This, with a bit of water behind it, is a really, really nice, warm, light black or deepest possible brown. And that's why I love these. And to back that up, let me find my Mars Black pencil. This is exactly the same. It's sort of the same sort of color, and it's so useful if you're only wanting to carry one thing. Like, I would love this in a smaller container, something more this size, to be fair, especially if I was even planning to go out anywhere, because I can't get it in this brand at the moment, or I haven't seen it. I'm going to keep looking. So if anybody knows of a brand that will give me one that's, what is this? Oh gosh. 20 mil. This one's a 20 mil, whereas this is amazingly huge. It's 100 mil. So I would rather a smaller one. I love Mars Black and I love Forest, this green pencil, because they're more than one color depending on what you do with them. And of course, famously, I think on here I have shown you already that if you go over this with the Chinese white, it turns purple, so you get another color. So with these two, you've got light black, very, very dark brown, or indeed purple. So that works really well. Okay, next thing, I'm going to compare those two. And I'm going to compare these two. Let's do these two next. I can't take both of these into a kit, so I want to see which one is better. This one is the Holbein Misty Blue, and I'm thinking of skies and water here. See, that's quite good. misty blue. And you'll notice I'm watering these down quite a bit. You can actually use them thicker, especially if you're doing stroke work or want some opacity. You can use them a lot thicker. You can mix them with all sorts of media, or like I use my gouache, you can water them right down so that they're really, excuse me, more of a plastic form of watercolor. This one is the Holbein Pale Aqua, which I have reached for a few times. And I particularly like this one over the other one because it brightens up the picture. Let me see if I can find one where I've used that to show that point. In fact, I bet I won't now. It's okay. I guess that sort of is. This one here, where you've got these reds and russets with a bit of green and olive. Having this aqua sky brings some light into the whole thing. And again, this pencil from Derwent Lightfast is quite similar, which is also good for working back over it once it's dry. Here again, I have said this before, and it's worth mentioning now, just in case you're new. If mixed media is not working for you, as in you see people using wet media and then over the top with coloured pencil, and you try it and the coloured pencil doesn't do anything, it's because it isn't dry. You absolutely have to dry it first and dry it thoroughly. Otherwise, it simply won't work. I can show you what I mean here. For example, if I was to go over this, can you see nothing at all is happening? I'm dragging the paint a little bit, but nothing's happening. I'll tear the paper first. Let me dry it and show you the difference. I've dried that and the paper is not thanking me. It's buckled horribly because it's not designed for wet media. But now that I've dried it and go over the top, look at the difference. Just with that one there, with the light aqua over the Mars Black paint, and also over the inks, and you can't see it very well there, to be fair. Where I would use it on a colour like this, supposing I painted a sky with this colour and I wanted to use this colour pencil, would be for filling in if there were gaps. Fill in, and sometimes to go over the top to create a resist and just some extra texture in the sky. Even though the sky, I mean, you want to see the sky today, it is a complete flat grey. It's as boring as boring. However, if I was to paint that, I would paint it with some texture. I never... Oh, rarely ever. No, I can say never. I don't think I have ever painted the sky completely flat blue, flat black, flat grey. I've always tried to get some sort of texture in. See, I like what's happening here, for example, and any of that. But no, you can see what I mean. I started here on the wet medium with the pencil over the top. Nothing happens. You will tear the paper. Once it's dry, we're good. Can do all sorts. And other colours as well. It just all goes over the top. This is forest. So also good. And that's what I like. This, of course, is the same. All of these. You would think sometime, in fact, I'm pretty sure back in the day, the coloured pencils I had at the time, which weren't brilliant, certainly not the quality I've got now, and the acrylic paint, you couldn't go over the top with coloured pencils. And that's what you've got to be careful with, the difference between acrylic and acrylic gouache. These, the acrylic gouache, you can go over the top with coloured pencils and other media like ink and other markers. Some acrylics you can't. They don't dry nice and matte. They're not... They're just, you've got to be careful. So going for acrylic gouache is the way to go, in my opinion, if you want to work back over the top. And the examples I've shown you here on acrylic gouache have been done that way. And it's also worth mentioning here too that if you decide that you don't want to do jelly printing, because not everybody does, don't sort of look at the pictures I showed you originally and thought, well, that's not relevant to me because I'm never going to do that. Because if you were to just paint in acrylics, as we will when we sketch, you'll achieve exactly the same thing. You don't have to print with the jelly plate. That might beg the question, well, why bother? Because they're expensive. And the answer that I've got for that is the textures you can get. They are unbelievably good, and you can't get them with a brush. So that's why I resisted for ages, but finally capitulated. Okay, what else have we got here? We have got ash yellow, which is also a Holbein paint. And again, get some water. See, that's a beautiful muted, it's beige and it's green at the same time. So far, yeah, let me just circle back here. I'm going to try and sneak both of these blues into my kit for November, so don't tell anybody. I'm sure I know you can keep a secret, so we'll just pop those in and say no more about it. I've got a couple here that I've got two of. And like I said, there's a green here that I've got a real bee in my bonnet over. So there's two of those. Sorry, I'm just off to the side here organising myself. Deep green, deep green. That one's not. That one's good. Love that one and that one. And okay, so I've got two forms of yellow brown and a raw sienna, which are very, very similar. Two olive greens and two deep greens. And I will get to those at the end. First of all, whilst we're with this sort of colour, this is Dandelion. This one's another Turner. And I like this too, because what you do get in November are some bright spots. Gosh, it would have to be bright, of sunshine. And sometimes this will hit a piece of ground in the distance or even in the foreground, and you get these bright areas. This, used very sparingly, would be a good sort of thing to use. So I'm going to say I really quite like all of those. This one's Japanesque deep yellow. Now, let me pop it next to it, because that's the idea of this, and then I'll tell you. Okay, you don't need both of those, and I'm not having both of those. To be fair, and in my defense, these are different enough to be able to include both. I think I could get away with both. These are not. So it is down to what on earth is a Japanesque colour and what is just regular. Okay, now, first of all, disclaimer, I'm not promising and pretending to know anything about traditional Japanese painting. Not a thing, so I'm not going to comment on that. But these are formulated for traditional Japanese painting. I really love the colour. And I also love the texture. It's got a fine tooth to it. If you've ever used pastel matte paper and you know how that feels and how it accepts lots and lots of layers of coloured pencil and lots of layers of pastels, it's the same feeling when it's dry. So you can do a lot over this that you can't over this. So that would be a reason for choosing the Japanesque colour over the regular acrylic gouache, is you can do more with this, in my opinion, for the sort of painting that I do. I've got both because full set syndrome, but also it'll depend what I want to do down the track and what works best and how I want to use this. This one's so thin on the page you can't feel the grit, but if you use it quite thickly and opaquely, you absolutely can feel the difference. And in the next weeks, I'd like to explore this a little bit more. I don't want to get too far off the beaten track today, but what I'm going to do here is be ruthless, and I'm going to put Dandelion in and put my Japanesque aside for now. Yeah, it hurts because I love it. I have another Japanesque colour coming up, so maybe I'll make up for it there. Venetian red is another nice one. And again, this is the sort of maybe a burnt sienna type colour, a little bit brighter than that. But you're going to see this in a minute, starring in my How Disappointing Can a Green Get bit of the program. I'll show you what I'm going to do with it. This is another Japanesque colour. This is Japanesque greyish red. It's more of a pink, but again, this is the sort of colour you see at the minute. And I do like the way they play together. I think I could see the point of that one. And also it would be useful to grey some other colours down. Or, okay, better explain that because it's not grey. It's got grey in it, but it's not what I meant. When you get a colour that you don't like because it's too bright, find out, if you don't know already, find out what two of the primary colours make that colour up. For example, green is made from blue and yellow. So the third primary is red, and that's the colour that wasn't used to make it. So that's the colour you use to mute it down. And we can do a bit of that in a second. That will be useful for that if it's too bright here. You can also mix it with the Mars Black to just knock it back a bit. These are all a bit brighter than I would like, but they can all be knocked back a little bit. This is already a bit of a primary, so I'd use a grey or this Mars Black to knock that back. This one here is enough of an orange to cope, to count as being an orange. I'd use an orange is made from red and yellow. Blue is the primary that wasn't used, so blue is the colour you use to mute that down. And this one is a pinky sort of grey red. And there's a lot going on in here. But again, you can use these other colours, any of these other colours, to make that a little bit more muted, which I think is really what I want. However, I'm trying to allow myself to have one or two bright colours to make the grey, the muted colours less sort of muddy and something to focus on. Because like I said, at this time of the year, you can get, if the sun does come out at all, you get this wonderful spot of colour. So it's nice to have a couple up my sleeve for that. This one is raw sienna, so pure and simple raw sienna. This one is a Holbein colour. Pretty nice. And then we've got a Japanesque yellow brown from Turner. And I'm going to have to put one of these aside. You could also argue that this ink up here is very, very similar. The reason why I'm not choosing between media like that is because they both behave in different ways. Okay, that's the Japanesque colour, and that is very, very similar. I'm going to use the Japanesque colour this time and put the regular away. So I've got that. This is transparent. Even when it's quite thickly put on, it is still going to be transparent because it's an ink. These, if I really build the colours up, can make these completely opaque. So they're going to behave totally different. However, you don't need both of these. So I'm going to go with the Japanesque one because I haven't got a Japanesque one and I want that texture. And that will marry well with that for different uses. So sadly, the raw sienna is going to lose there, and the Japanesque yellow brown can be used. Here again, I have got two regular acrylic gouaches, two different brands, same deal. I need to really pay attention to what I'm buying because it feels to me that I've doubled up unnecessarily. This one's olive green. So that's quite a nice, rich olive green. And again, if you sort of put more down, you'll get more of a solid layer. Sorry about the shine there. I didn't realise that. Let me just make sure you can actually see. It's quite a rich olive green, actually, and I like that. It goes nicely with these other colours too. That one was the Turner olive green. Then I have a Holbein olive green. And the Holbein olive green looks a little bit, oh dear, I think the doorbell's going to go in a second. I'm expecting a delivery of, would you believe, more acrylic paint. Okay, this is a situation where I think I'd keep both. In fact, I think I prefer that to the dandelion, even though that's got its point as well. Like the two blues, these are different enough to keep both. These are not, and these are not. So where sometimes I have to choose, sometimes I don't. So I would keep both of these because they're different enough. They also go nicely with the other ash yellow. So I really quite like that whole lot. Now, one of the most important things that you should be doing when you choose a palette and you're planning a palette and you're planning a season based around a colour, a lot of colours, is there has to be a light value, a medium value, and a dark value. You need those contrasts in order to give your painting life. When I say value, what I mean by that is the lightness or darkness of a colour. So these are all pretty medium. There's a couple of very light ones. Those could be counted as light. This one here, this one here, this one here. Some of these, depending on how you use them, they're also very light. Then you've got this mid-range here. And if I was only to use this lot, the painting would turn out very flat indeed. Now, bear in mind that this one here can also be quite dark, as I can prove here to make our point by adding a little bit more of the actual colour itself. You've got a darker value there. And simply like making cordial, the more water you put in, the lighter it'll get. But some of these, it doesn't matter what you do, they are medium range colours, and if you use those and don't have enough of the others, your whole result will be a flat sort of, you look at the picture and think, it's kind of got everything where it should be and everything's done properly, but it's not doing it for me. And that's where you need a bit of depth. So we need dark colours. Now, before we get to the paints on those, some of my dark colours come in the case of these pencils. Like I said, Forest, that's a nice dark colour. Mars Black, which we've seen before, nice dark colour. The black pencil, obviously. Carmine Lake, this one. See, now that is a nice dark colour that gives a little bit of depth to this colour here. The rest of these are mid-tone. The Aqua that we've seen before, white is obvious. I'm not going to do too much with white on here because you'll not see it, but white is obviously a light colour. Green Ochre, that's a mid-tone. That goes with these over here. As you can see, it works well. And this yellow over here, which needs sharpening, is also a mid-range one. So with this color, this lot here, I have got some nice dark areas there that I can use. I may need another darker, well, the ink could go a bit darker. Maybe I need a different lot of markers. Maybe I need a Tombow in the mix. But I also want some greens, and I am so disappointed with the greens in this range. Love these paints, do not get me wrong, but the greens, not great. So let me show you. If we move some things out of the way here, and I'll show you what you can do to make the greens better. This one here is a Japanesque deep green, and I'll put some out, and then I will mix them together with these other colours just to give you some idea of what you can do. For starters, these are deep greens and some of the darkest in the range, and they're still not dark enough. So, because there's just no contrast, and you absolutely have to have it. So this is the Japanesque one. As you can see, it's not the colour I want. These are the colours I want. These yellow greens, which is more a me type palette. This is too bluey. I don't want that. And this one here is worse. This is the regular deep green. That's a real Christmas icing green. Used to be in the 70s. My mum did cake decorating and she had a Christmas green food colouring. God only knows what was in that. And it reminds me of that. It's not what I want at all. So we have to do some surgery. I'm going to start with a little bit of Mars Black over here. If I can get, it's just horrible to get stuff out of. The other thing I'm going to do is, I did mention this Venetian red, which I will bring in now. A little bit of that. This is going to mute the colour down, but it's not going to darken it very much. So let's start off with a little bit of this green and a little bit of the Mars black. I don't want to make it another colour other than green. I want to mute it down so that it's green, but just a lot darker and a lot less, I don't know, bright and iridescent-y sort of colour. See, now that's already worked as far as I'm concerned. That's much better already. And if you keep the water going, it's still got that bluey green undertone, but it's not too bad. I'd be happy enough to use that. And another thing that we can do is we can do what I said before. You take the primary that wasn't used to make it, which is a reddish colour. So I'm using Venetian red here. Because again, yellow and blue to make green, so we use red or a red to mute it down. That's also good. So you can see it's taken that bluiness out of it and it has muted it down, but it's also darkened it quite a bit, which is getting closer to where we need to be to have contrast in our work. These colours here, which are effectively sky and distance colours, they can be light because the further something goes away from you, the lighter it's going to be. We need these colours for things that are closer to you. And so that's quite important. So that's that one. Let's have a look at the other colour green here and see what happens if we do exactly the same thing. So a bit of Japanese green, bit of Mars black. You could argue that you shouldn't have to do this when you buy a green, and you shouldn't. And it's just, this is what happens sometimes on the computer. This one's gone to a dirty colour, but I really like it because I like those dirty muted colours. So that's a bit more green. That's better. And if you put water with it, see, that's much better and much darker. And they do look a bit dirty right now, but trust me, it's what I use in my work that makes the colours that I get. I'll then use the Forest Pencil, which is also a very deep green, if I can find it. This one here, as you can see, that's also a deep and dirty green. And those colours now really they go quite well with that. And finally, to make it a fair test, let me just pop in some Venetian red with this. I used a bit too much red, I'm afraid. That's no longer any sort of green. Kind of is. Just going to put in a bit more green. You only need a pea-sized lot of these colours, and wash your brushes after each time, because if you're used to using gouache or watercolour that will re-wet, this won't. It'll wreck your brush. Let me just pop that up here so we can see. That's a real sort of khaki army green, that one, with the orange in it, or rather the Venetian red, and with a bit of water to wash it out, you can see all of the colours in it. And again, it's as muddy can be, and that's what I like. So now for this palette that I've chosen, you can see we're starting to get a little bit of variation. You've got some dark brown, you've got some black in the form of this, and you've got some dark coloured pencils. You've got the greens. All of these greens that I've made muddy and darker can be lightened with these yellows and these golds. And even this one, if you want to lighten that particular green, or you can just go for these. So what I would like to do now is to get a suitable piece of paper, as in not this, and let's do a little sketch using our palette here and see what we come up with. What do you think? So I shall see you shortly. So I have an idea in mind. Just let me get my watercolour pencil. I'm just going to draw some hills here. Something quite simple, just rolling hills, and maybe, how about we have a little hut here? Gosh, that's a bit big. I quite like having a house like that, middle of nowhere, and maybe like that. So something quite simple. And then we can start off with a slightly larger brush. Actually, how about we use my favourite dome blender? So again, I would use plenty of water on that. A bit of water here. This is not a good idea, because if you admit sometimes water to the tube of paint, you can end up getting bacterial problems and mold. So it's really not a good idea. Having said that, I do it more often than I like to admit. Right. Again, I'm trying to keep this quite nice and textured. And what I would do with that now is, when that dries, is come back over the top with a bit of the ink and see what we can do with that. Get as much out of the brush as possible. So that was Pale Aqua by Holbein. Now I'm going in with an ash yellow, because that's my next lightest. However, because we've got a couple of things here, let's also use this Liquitex marker in the grey, just to put a bit of texture on there. It's only quite light because, like I said, this is a distant hill, this one. We don't want to keep bringing everything forward, because otherwise there'll be no distant hills anywhere. And I work from wet to dry as a general rule. Now I'm going to take some of these greens I've mixed. Just put some of those in. And I'm starting reasonably light-handed here. We need another one. That was the Holbein one, wasn't it? Going to use the olive green one next. Straight over the top. Bit of texture, bring that down here. This one's just a regular acrylic, not Japanesque or anything like that, and I'm scrubbing it round, leaving some gaps on purpose, like so, and clean the brush off on the distant hills. Be a bit careful, because when the paper is wet is when it's at its most fragile. So you can build some of these colours up with just a little bit of dry brushed paint. It'll go through an ugly stage first, that is absolutely dead normal. And the olive Holbein for a bit of foreground here. And again, I'm deliberately leaving gaps. Excuse me. You'd have thought the allergies got a little bit better in this weather, but no. Okay, so scrubbed in the foreground. And I quite like this idea. And what happens is, when you use some of these liquid mediums like ink, they're not going to, excuse me, they're not going to grab onto this layer of green paint. They're going to grab onto the paper and bite into that. So that's how we sort of get the interesting marks. It's because it will bite randomly where I've left gaps. Now, I'm assuming the sun is coming from the left, or the light is coming from the left. It does in most of my pictures. So this is ivory, and you may have noticed, as I always do, I actually started this sketch with a watercolor pencil, and that's because I can scrub it out, use it as part of the texture here and there. And if I used pencil, if you go over pencil, like just normal graphite pencil with water, you will set it permanently, whereas I don't want that. I want to be able to get rid of it and blur these lines, and this is acrylic, so that does that a bit. Just going over some of the gaps now, with that. Just fill that in. Also here, same ivory marker, more textures on the top there, a little bit here, a little bit up the back. Don't need too much up the back, but have a little bit. And on the roof, we're going to use this roof colour. I can use my normal brush for that. And the roof will be visible down here a little bit too. But also the sky. Let's pop some of this into the sky. It's not going to go over everything. It will create marks, however, and those will be interesting. You can't control them, so don't even try. You can be as pleasantly surprised as everybody else when you make a painting in seeing how they actually eventuate. Just going to blend the edges a bit, and I'm going to leave that and let it do its thing. Because like I said, where there is paint, and because it's gouache, is this acrylic gouache, anything acrylic is like a layer of plastic. So when it dries, it's immovable, it's permanent, but it's also very good for creating a resist. And what this is doing is it's grabbing onto all the bits in between. So that's quite exciting in a way there. This layer, I don't want to do too much at all. I'm going to put some textures in with pencils, and probably this one as well. So the next thing to do now, actually, let's grab some of this Eiffel brown golden ink, and we'll do the same thing down here as we did on the roof. Just popping some ink on and let it sink into the layers and do its thing. As with most things, when you have a palette like this, you're not going to use all of it every single time. Sometimes you will, sometimes you won't. That's just how it goes. Right, and finally for this bit, I would like to get some of this one. Oh, actually, I had some on here rather stupidly. I'm that clever. And put that on there. Move that with my fingers because I really want that as a texture. Trust me, this will make sense shortly. At the moment, it's a mess. Glaze over that a bit. This is the Mars black colour. And a bit in there as well, because we can start to build up where there might be some trees. Don't want to scrub too much with this brush because it's not designed for it. And it won't thank you for it. Let's do some windows while we're here. Just some very simple ones. That works. Okay, now as you can see, this is what I was talking about with contrast. At the moment we've got some light and medium areas, but we don't have anything dark, and dark is what's needed now to give the painting drama. So I'm going to dry this, and then we're going to come back in and add some darker areas. Be right back. I'm just holding that shut because it's still warm from my hand dryer, and what I've got is one of these Ranger heat tools, which I use for my cards, but it's also good for drying paint. You can use a hairdryer as well, but what I do is while it's still hot, I close it and put some pressure on it, because this is a Hahnemühle, lot thicker paper, better quality paper than the last one that I did the swatches on, but it still buckles slightly. Most papers will if you put too much water on them, but that's better, and that's made it nice and smooth. Okay, now first things first, you can see here the grey on the sky. That works. I would leave that alone. That's how I would deal with that. The next thing to do now is we could go into some of our nice darker greens here that we've made. So I've got a couple of them, and just put some towards some trees around the house. Not too much because it's not a green time of the year. Just add a little bit around the house. I think that's about all that's needed. Maybe a little bit on the in there. Remembering if you do that, you've got to dry that again. So let's just give that a dry. It's not quite as much. When your paper feels room temperature or warm, it's almost certainly dry. I dry it both sides because that's just how paper works. Let's leave that. Now, working from the back forward, let's sharpen this yellow ochre pencil. Gosh, not to that extent. Oh God, I changed the blade in my pencil sharpener and now it really works brilliantly. Just going to put a little bit of this here and there on the rear mountain. It's a little bit of texture. Let us also come in with forest. And as you can see, I'm using this on its side because I can not only cover ground, but I can get the sort of texture that I'm after without harsh lines. Next one coming down, also the same with the forest. Now I've got a little sort of gully in here, so I think a bit of definition between the two there is good. This is somewhere like the Peak District in England, where you've got these lovely rolling hills. Not a hell of a lot of trees, if I'm honest. None in some cases is the tree count. 0. Back to a bit of yellow in here too. This is kind of cheating because these are colours that I've used quite a bit the rest of the year. I've had a couple of people just recently ask me how my pages get to be so beautiful and shiny, and do I seal them? I don't seal them, and the only thing I can come up with for to account for the shininess, this is Carmine Lake, is the layering of the mixed media. See, as I'm doing this, I'm slightly burnishing the paper and pushing it down. Let's get this green. And that will make it shiny. So it's sort of a combination of factors. Because, yeah, I only seal if I absolutely have to. And only then if I've used something like a pastel, maybe sometimes art graph. Okay. Just using different colours here. This is a bit grainy, so I'm going to burnish this. Keep going off the edge there, which is tedious. This is my green ochre pencil by Caran d'Ache. Blend it out. When you want to burnish, use a lighter colour. So keep going back to a lighter colour. So we started with forest, went to green ochre, and now we're yellow ochre. Okay, so keep that bare. This is good the way it is. A little bit of lightness there. Then down here we may as well keep this colour as well, because this is the distant bit there. And these what do we got? Black, Mars black. Let's level this building up a bit. So this will have a bit of texture on it because this one is away from the light. This is also a good opportunity to work out, do you have the colours you need? I mean, is there anything missing? Really, the only way to find out is to do something with what you've got. For example, I would burnish that with a white, being careful because I'm creating purple now and I don't really want that. This can be more white as well, over the top of the ivory. A little bit of white on the roof too. I feel I need something to create light under that roof. Oh, sorry, shade under that roof. So I'm going to bring in my Faber-Castell marker just to give that some shade. The windows are okay. This is a cottage. It doesn't have to be perfect. Maybe a different colour, because I've got the ink on the roof. I can either go in with ink again or another sort of marker. Tend to go for this because it is easier than ink sometimes, and besides which then I can say I've used these as well. Bring a bit of that down here. Quite like to go off the edge of stuff and straddle it with these. This one is an Acrylic brush pen in grey, simply grey. I'm not wild about the colour on the edge here for these trees because it looks a little bit too summery, and this is supposed to be autumn. So let us get some yellow brown. Let us get a brush and let us just touch the edges. Oh, come on, I know you're in there. A little bit. Just pounce a little bit of that onto the edges because this is supposed to be autumn and it's supposed to be sort of going off by now. So we don't want all the trees to be green. Just stippling that on, which gives us that leafy sort of effect. And if it's still not quite light enough on the edges, we can go to dandelion, same brush, and being very careful not to contaminate the paint, but not wanting to wash the brush either, and then pounce some lighter over the top of that. Stippling like this is really, really a lovely way to get the foliage in. If the trees were further back, I would use a different technique, but because these are sort of around about the foreground here, it's quite nice to have them a little bit more defined so that you can actually see the leaves, and that's a really good way of doing it. So for this bit here, I'm going to use a little bit of yellow ochre, which also just brings these layers together a little bit, and green ochre. Even though autumn sometimes does have mainly oranges and yellows, there's almost always still a little bit of green in the mix. And these olivey greens are great for that. For example, I think I would use this olive yellow ochre to create some branchy bits. And up here, so that you can see more of what's going on with those leaves, back in with some forest to slightly darken this, to give the trees a bit more context. Keep it all nice and dark there, otherwise you can't see what's going on. Because this picture is just in my head, I can do what I like. I'm just getting in here. I really want that bit to be dark. And blend it off to the background there a bit. Okay. Okay, how are we doing? We could actually use a bit of this green on the roof. I really like to use colours in a couple of different areas, so I would rarely just use it in the one place. So we've got this forest elsewhere, I'd also use it on the building. Coming back in now with some ivory, just to neaten bits up and also brighten this bit up by going over the top. And there is quite often this toing and froing, so you know, you do a bit and then you come back and do something else over the top of it. That happens quite a bit actually. Right, we could leave it there. We could suggest that we need a fence of some sort, and that might be done using this one. So just some fence line there. This is Any fine liner would be good. I'm using an acrylic one because I've put an acrylic one into the kit, so I'm using it. You could also use this if you wanted to neaten those windows up a bit. But like I said, I want to keep the sort of the old stone feel to it. That's gone a bit weird here. Yep, just fix that up a bit and blend that. Like I said, if something's looking a bit grainy and you don't want to take it too far down, but it's just not right, you can use a lighter coloured pencil over the top of it to burnish it. Okay, the only thing I think is missing now is a little bit of foreground interest, and I'm going to use some of these dark greens that I mixed. That one's the Japanesque one. They're not wanting to cooperate. They're a little bit on the dry side, some of them, but I just want to put in some sort of foreground detail without painting all the other, oh gosh, that's a bit of foreground detail, isn't it? Maybe sort of bits of grassy texture. Some of it's more like a blackberry hedge, because otherwise the field is just too big and pointless. And whereas up here there's not going to be much in Daisy, my apologies, quiet. She knows as the postman's coming, that he normally comes about now. Daisy, shut up. Shh. Right. Always has one last say. I apologise for my dog's input. Right, what I'll do is I'll dry that and we will add some other textures with coloured pencil. This is the good thing about being a mixed media artist, is you've got all these options that you can put in and use. So we could go with Mars Black. Let's just some brambly tangles, that sort of thing, a bit of a hedgerow. And then just give it a bit of a darken up in the bottom. You can glaze with a coloured pencil like this. And my forest. Honestly, if these go off the market, I'm afraid I will have to stop art for a considerable time of mourning, because I use them daily. I cannot remember the last time I didn't use them. Some of these can get quite large, funny enough, these strings and tendrils, because this is your foreground. So the idea is you might be walking along a road and you'd see this. Let's blend that in a bit too. And you could use maybe some of, oh gosh, now the cat started. Maybe it's time we knocked off here. He's not going to get any better. Anyway, I think I have almost certainly achieved what I had planned here. So using the colours that I had sorted out here, this is sort of one thing that can be achieved. Now, as I said before, I've shown you a lot of the jelly prints that I did. What I would do with the jelly print is I would do all of this onto the jelly plate and then print it and then work back into it. But if you don't want to do that, if you haven't got a jelly plate or you just don't want to go there, just paint straight onto the paper as normal. And you can still achieve the same effects with the same product, with the exception of the texture. You aren't going to get the texture. Let me show you, let me find some. Some of these I've worked back into so much. This, for example, this reminded me of an old film because of all the sort of blurred texture and bits and pieces. And all of this just created itself. And that's why I use the jelly plate for these. But I could have just as easily just painted that as it is onto a piece of paper, and so can you. So it just depends what you're after. This is quite a glowy, it's almost sunlit, but yeah, there's more that we could do here. That you could darken these bits up here and sort of put a little bit more into the contour of the hillside if you wanted to, and for that I would use forest. This one's forest, or you could use your Mars black, just to give it the dynamic color that it needs. And that's important, to actually stand back from time to time, have a look and see what you've created and say, right, well, this needs this or that. And above all, know when to stop, because you'll wreck it if you keep going. I certainly will. I'm more than capable. The idea is also not to cover up everything with the paint. You know, don't cover all the paint up with pencil. You may as well not have the paint. That sort of thing. I promise I'm going to stop any second, because otherwise I will regret it. Leave it. So that is the sort of thing you can do with this palette. In a different place with more trees, you could have more trees and more green things and so forth like that. But this part of England is actually quite well known for not having a lot of trees, especially on the higher hills. It does have these little cottages, however, and there are quite often some trees around those, and that's what we've done. So thank you so much if you've stayed with me this long. I really appreciate your time. You've got no idea. It makes my day. So remember, if you want to see more, consider joining my Patreon, and otherwise I will see you again next week, and we will do something else, which hopefully also something autumny. Maybe we can start looking at the skeletons of trees and how you draw a tree. That might be worth visiting actually at some point. So yeah, I do hope you've enjoyed this. I've certainly enjoyed showing you, and I will see you again next week. Do take care. Bye.